We're here again with Pat McGuigan. Thanks for joining us this morning. So the debt in the United States has actually reached an all-time high. Is that right? What does that mean for Oklahomans?
Yeah, part of what's going on is that analysts are burrowing deeper than they used to, and the latest kind of provocative headline actually comes from one person, Bill Gross, who's a very respected financial analyst with PIMCO. Most of the viewers probably heard of PIMCO, but he began getting real worried about what's going on in Greece about a week ago. And then in the last few days, over the course of this past week, he has really intensified his look at America's underlying unfunded debt. And he's reached a figure, he says it's $100 trillion. Now, what makes that so interesting and significant is that just a week ago, when USA Today's financial reporter estimated the total debt at $62 trillion, it made worldwide headlines. Then you have dissenters out there like the Institute for Truth in Accounting that say it's 75 or 76 trillion. So now Bill Gross is saying 100 trillion. What he points to is Greece and the turmoil that Greece has, and he says on a per capita basis or a total basis that we're worse than Greece in terms of debt. Now, what's driving it? What's driving this analysis is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the financial bailouts of the last few years. Then there's the Government Accounting Office and some other studies that show that over a 3-decade period, the states have consistently not kept up in revenue with what their expenditures are. So this gap's getting bigger and bigger. Whether it's 100 trillion or 62 trillion, it's very troubling. And what does it mean for Oklahoma? A quick sketch would be our traditional measures of what our debt is are being revisited, and there's very credible analysis that debt is actually about 3 times higher than the annual appropriated budget. So in other words, somewhere around $20 billion versus the 6.2 or 3 billion that we appropriate in expenditures through the legislature. So all this is very tumultuous and troubling. Solutions, Gross and others say you have to match revenue with expenditures. Some people say that means tax increases, but a strong case could be made that now we've got to button down further and cut spending.
Interesting. Nobody wants to hear about tax increases.
Yeah, it's a very tumultuous time right now in the markets.
Now, what about higher education? Another report there, speaking of higher education, what is that saying about Oklahoma?
Well, higher education, obviously, education is beneficial to an individual, but there is a study that's done by a group called the Center for College Affordability and Productivity in affiliation with the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs here in the state, and they burrowed deep into this assumption that there is a link between economic growth and higher education spending per se. And they decoupled that and found that in terms of Oklahoma, economic growth is being driven by our heritage industries, our traditional industries, oil and gas, agriculture, and so forth, and much less so by higher ed. And then in this study, they've laid out some very discouraging data. You've got schools like Rogers State, where the graduation rate is only 4% after 4 years, gets as high as 14% after 6. Cameron, 6% after 4 years, 20% after 6 years. At OU and OSU, they're both doing better. 29% after 4 years at OU and 63% after 6. OSU, 31% versus 60%. So 6 years at the major universities, at least, kids are getting a degree, most of them. But the key finding that's been kind of controversial is burrowing down on that question of the linkage between economic growth and spending per se on higher education. There's a theory called the Bowen Rule, named for an economist, and he said that higher education is the classic example of an institution that will spend whatever it gets. And if you buy that, it's not really an irrational thing for higher education institutions to do, but it might be irrational in terms of taxpayer needs. And that's why this study is provoking a lot of attention. Of course, the Chancellor, Glenn Johnson, and others in higher ed are quarreling with it. But what I say is the economists from those schools need to burrow down and see if they find different conclusions. Key thing, that link is not as direct or maybe not there at all And that's true nationwide, not just in Oklahoma.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting perspectives. If you want to learn more about what some things Pat says, just go to his news website. That's CapitolBeatOK.com.